So this afternoon, we have Brother James Shammas from the Oak Knoll congregation in Napa, and his talk is Coping with Life's Anxieties. Brother Shammas.
Maybe you heard the story about the little girl and her mother that went shopping at the general store. Well, after they paid for their purchases, the shop owner opened this very large jar of candy, and he said to the little girl, "Put your hand in the jar and take all you want." Instead, she put her hands behind her back, put her head down, and took a step backwards. Well, both the mother and the shopkeeper tried to persuade her to help herself, but to no avail. Well, finally the merchant put his hand in the jar, pulled out a fistful of candy, and put him in her now cupped hands. There was so much candy that several pieces fell to the floor, which the mother promptly picked up and gave to her daughter. Well, after thanking the kind man, the mother whispered to her daughter on the way out, "Why wouldn't you put your hand in the candy jar?" And without hesitation, the little girl answered, "His hands are bigger than mine." Wise reasoning. Well, so too are Jehovah's hands bigger than ours. There's a lesson. Regardless of our circumstances, we need to put our lives in Jehovah's hands. Otherwise, our problems at times are just too great, too heavy to carry alone, and then our anxiety overwhelms us. So let me ask you, how are you coping with life's anxieties? What are you anxious about? Pause for a moment. What situations can you think of that cause anxiety? What's causing you anxiety? Well, first of all, do you know what anxiety is? The Greek word for anxiety is to be torn in two, pulled apart inside. That's anxiety. Well, this afternoon I'm going to name several different situations that can be a cause for anxiety. Let's see if one of them touches a sensitive nerve with you. Well, maybe it's the economic conditions. Last year you made $30, $40, $50, $60, even $70,000, and with a difficulty made ends meet. Now, while inflation rate continues to be relatively stable, the high cost of everything never allows us to have anything left over. Or are you troubled because of an ailment? The increasing prevalence of sickness. The scenario is the same. We've discovered a growth or a lump, and we're waiting for the doctor's report to find out if it's cancerous or not, if it's malignant. So you're especially concerned because everybody else here in the audience knows at least one person with cancer. So our health is a true cause for anxiety. Maybe you're one that's experienced the death of a loved one. It's been labeled the most traumatic human experience, the most upsetting experience of a lifetime, a true cause for anxiety. Maybe you're experiencing marital problems. For one reason or another, things aren't going the way they should. Maybe you're even discussing separation. Or maybe you're worried about one of your children. They're at the age where you're having less and less to say about the direction of their lives. They're to the point where they have to decide for themselves whether or not they want to serve Jehovah. So it is natural, is it not, to be anxious. Is it unemployment that makes you anxious? Is it going to get better? Time will tell. But it is demoralizing, is it not, to want to work and not be able to find a job. Maybe you're experiencing anxiety because of your relationship with a brother or sister, maybe right here in your own congregation. It's not as it should be. There's a distance it shouldn't be. The vibes aren't right. It even makes you nervous to see them at the Kingdom Hall. More anxiety. Maybe it's crime, the vicious nature of crime that unnerves you. We're living in the last days, so we don't expect it to get any better, do we? Is it your housing situation that makes you anxious? Sometimes we can only hope for the future where each of us will be properly housed with adequate space in a clean environment. Maybe you're one that made a serious mistake in the past and you've corrected the problem. Jehovah and the congregation has seen fit to welcome you back. Maybe you're concerned and anxious about your worthiness to be accepted by Jehovah as one of his approved people. Maybe you're divorced with the whole set of problems that accompany it: loneliness, guilt, frustration, anger. Or maybe you're one of many that's tired of being alone in the sense that you don't have a marriage mate. You don't want to just be married, but you want a spiritually minded mate, and so far you haven't met the right person. Well, we've touched on some real life situations, and maybe you can relate to one or more. But regardless, even if a problem close to your heart wasn't mentioned, we demonstrate wisdom when we accept Jehovah's kindly offer to turn to him in confidence for relief from anxiety. We should be comforted with the warm and sympathetic invitation that Jehovah inspired his servant Peter to write. And speaking from experience, this is what he advises us in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Throw all your anxiety upon him because he cares for you. The psalmist at Psalm 9:9, David saying, Jehovah will become a secure refuge in times of his distress. He promised that, didn't he? So he knows what we're going through. He knows our imperfect state. He knows our limitations. And so he's encouraging us to unburden ourselves and let him carry our load. So the big question is, how? How are we able to throw our burden on Jehovah? Well, we want to consider this afternoon a few encouraging Bible examples of individuals that have experienced anxiety and what they did to cope. Let's look first at Job. Here he is, on his way home, some 20 years after he fled on account of his brother Esau's hatred toward him. Now, if you remember, Jacob, not Esau, got their father Isaac's blessing. Now, Jacob had just left his father-in-law after serving 20 years. Laban had him work 20 years for him, 7 years for each of his 2 wives, and 6 years for the flock. At Genesis chapter 32, we're told he was apprehensive about meeting his brother Esau. What's going through his mind is, did Esau still harbor the same murderous intent toward Jacob that he had 20 years earlier? Or had those 20 years dissolved or neutralized the hostile feelings? Jacob didn't know. He was worried. The Bible says he was anxious. So he sends messengers ahead to meet his brother. We can follow the account at Genesis 32, beginning with verse 6. This is what it says. In time, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We met your brother Esau, and he is now on his way to meet you. And here's the part that brought nervous perspiration to his forehead. There are 400 men with him. So verse 7 says, Jacob became very frightened, and he grew, notice, anxious. What did he do? He prayed. He said at verse 9, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Jehovah. Verse 11 continues, Save me, I pray you, from the hand of my brother Esau. For I am afraid of him, that he may come and attack me as well as the mothers and their children. Well, Jehovah heard Jacob's prayer, because to quote him at verse 30, he said, My life was preserved. So the recipe was Jacob prayed, his anxiety left, and Jehovah delivered him. Another example of one in the Bible coping with life's anxieties, that's David. Now what about David's turbulent life caused him to turn to Jehovah for strength to be able to bear up under his many, many, many troublesome situations? What situations, you ask? Well, think about all the years he was running from Saul for his life. He had no security whatsoever. Think about the internal turmoil of his own family, starting with the infant death of their first son by Bathsheba. So he had no security and death in the family. And then the revolt of his third and beloved son Absalom. We could say that he raised his son in the truth, and his son left it. He even opposed his father. So David weathered insecurity, family death, and severe disappointment. Yet David, through all of it and because of it, could say at Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, a help that is readily found in times of distress. He also said at Psalm 49:19, when anxieties overwhelm me, you comforted and soothed me. So we do well to imitate David in how he showed complete reliance on his Father, Jehovah. Now finally, let's look at the Apostle Paul and how Jehovah gave loving attention to his prayers for relief. Relief from what? Well, the consensus of the society and other commentators is that maybe Paul had suffered from a chronic eye infection. And we say that because of the way he signed some of the letters that he wrote. Colossians chapter 4, verse 18, and 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 17, he wrote this, here is my greeting, Paul's, in my own hand, indicating somebody else wrote the letter, he just wrote the greeting. And then in Galatians chapter 6, verse 11, he wrote, see with what large letters I have written you in my own hand, indicating he wrote the whole letter along with the greeting. And even though his relief didn't come in the way Paul expected, yet we know he was strengthened to endure. He was aided to the extent that he was able to go ahead and accomplish things that stagger the mind when we think of how he advanced kingdom interests. And this in spite of being thrown into prison, being beaten, and suffering many other hardships. So these examples of faithful men in times past with problems similar to ours should encourage us to imitate the course they followed in casting their anxieties on Jehovah. Now the Bible recommends that we do three things. One, in faith, we should pray. Like Jacob, we should pour out our hearts to Jehovah, never doubting that he can and will give attention to our earnest and sincere petitions. David, too, without question felt that way because he said at Psalm 28, 6 and 7, may Jehovah be praised, for he has heard my pleas for help. Jehovah is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts. I have received his help. He also strongly recommended in the 62nd Psalm, verse 8, 62:8, he said, trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts before him. God is a refuge for us. Well, also stressing the value of praying for specifics. We pray for specifics, not generally. There was this overweight businessman that decided it was time he shed some excess pounds. He took his diet very seriously. He even changed his driving route to work so he could avoid his favorite bakery. Well, this one morning he comes to work carrying this huge It was a gigantic coffee cake, and everybody scolded him because they were all aware of the diet he was on. But his smile remained angelic. He said, "This is a very, very special coffee cake. I accidentally drove by the bakery this morning, and there in the window was this host of goodies, and I thought it wasn't an accident. So I prayed, Lord, if you want me to have one of those delicious coffee cakes, let me find a parking place right in front of the bakery." And sure enough, the 8th time around the block, there it was. Brother Putzinger, a former member of the governing body, was asked, "Did you pray a lot when you were in the concentration camp for those 9 years?" And his answer was, "Life is one big prayer. Don't say I'm going to sleep on it. Rather, I'm going to pray on it." Another experience on the value of praying for specifics was this little girl who heard her mother talk many, many times about wanting to have a Bible study. Well, one night her mother heard her pray to Jehovah, "Please give Mommy a Bible study." Every night she'd pray the same thing, "Please give Mommy a Bible study." Well, in a short time, the mother had 3 studies, so he told her daughter, "Better stop praying for more Bible studies because I don't have time to take care of any more." But the girl kept praying, and now the mother has 7 Bible studies. It really shows, does it not, that Jehovah listens to all sincere prayers. Now, the second point that the Bible recommends is that in addition to praying for specifics, is that while we persist in prayer, we need to continue to exercise faith that Jehovah has our problems in His mind, and in His time and way, He's going to provide us with a solution. Doesn't Proverbs 3:5 say, "Trust in Jehovah with all your heart, and don't rely on your own understanding"? It does. So we have to remember, in His time and in His way, our problems are going to be resolved. That means we have to prepare mentally to hold on, to accept the circumstances that we're living with. If we're single and we want to be married, Jehovah knows that. If we're struggling with an illness, Jehovah knows that. If we have an unbelieving mate, Jehovah knows that too. But at the same time, we should count our blessings. In other words, let's think about what we have, not about what we don't have. In hardship, our mind has the capacity to develop an appreciation for the beauty that exists in the simple elements of life. That's why it's been said, when it gets dark enough, then you can see the stars. Always remember, things could be worse. Just reflect for a moment, maybe on somebody right here in your own congregation with a tough problem. My question to you is, would you exchange your problem for their problem? Or let me put it another way. Everybody writes on a small slip of paper their major problem. I collect them all, I put them in my hat, I shake them up, and one at a time you come up, close your eyes, and you pick it out, and then you read your new problem. Well, if I was a betting man, the chances are you would, if you could, ask for your old problem back. Now, why is that? Isn't Jehovah already helping you with the problem you're talking to Him about now? That's something to think about, isn't it? Sometimes tests that are very difficult come along. Jehovah's trained us to deal with them successfully. How? To repeat Psalm 55:22, which tells us, "Throw your burden on Jehovah." To pray to God for practical wisdom to deal with our circumstances, and to trust the Bible's assurance that, as Psalm 107 verse 17 states, God will pay attention to the prayers of the destitute. And always remember, when the pressure of this system and the weight of the world brings you to your knees, you're in the perfect position to pray. Now, the third way to alleviate anxiety is to show concern for Jehovah's interest. Now, These interests include the needs of the congregation because Jehovah's interests are people-oriented. Do you ask yourself, what can I do to show more interest in my spiritual brothers? It's called the internal ministry. And in this way, too, we find relief from our own cares when we're out helping somebody else. The Apostle Paul, in comparing the literal physical body with God's congregation, said this, that its members should have mutual concern for one another. If one member hurts or suffers, all the other members suffer with it. Or if a member is glorified, all the other members rejoice with it. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 25. So this obvious comparison makes sense. Hit your thumb with a hammer. Your whole body aches. So what do? You run for the cold water. You get out the ice. You get out the ice. Yeah, you lick it. You suck it. Anything to make it feel better. Well, if you help or maybe somebody that's hurting in the congregation, every one of us will rejoice with you. Think about Jesus and how he took advantage of Jehovah's provisions in showing concern for his Father's interest. He was involved. He was busy within God's congregation. He felt compassion toward them, and he acted on their behalf. So you and I, all of us, need to be compassionate. There's an interesting comment in the June 15th, 2004 Watchtower, and this is what it said about compassion. Compassion is the language that even the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Let the beauty of compassion show itself in your life as you serve others. Only your best behavior is good enough for daily living, so be determined to clothe yourselves with compassion. If you remember, when David was immorally involved with Bathsheba and Jehovah sent his prophet Nathan to confront David, in a couple of weeks we're going to read that 51st chapter of Psalms. Very interesting chapter, something to focus on. Well, he gets this assignment, and it doesn't seem likely that Nathan jumps up and rushes over to accuse Nathan, to let him know that what he did wasn't a secret. Rather, it seems more likely that he gave some serious thought as to how he might approach this assignment. After all, remember that David was the king, top man in the country, and he had already killed one innocent man. So as the account in 2 Samuel chapter 12 unfolds, Nathan tells the story. He tells the story of the rich man with hundreds of sheep. And Samuel was in here the last time I looked. Oh yeah, there we go. He tells the story of the man with hundreds of sheep and another man of little means. Now the rich man, to feed his guests, takes the one lamb that belongs to the man of little means. And when David hears this, the account says he burns with anger and categorically states that the man deserves to die. Now, why should he die? Well, let's read 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 6. 2 Samuel 12, verse 6. And he should, this is David speaking, and he should pay for the lamb 4 times over, and here's the reason why. Because he did this and showed no compassion. He wasn't merciful. And mercy is compassion in action. So we all need to show compassion, every one of us. And isn't it true that each of us, to some degree, is anxious about something? Sometimes to the extent that it occupies an unhealthy amount of our time. The question is, how can we exchange the anxiety that we feel for the peace of God? Well, we know drugs aren't the solution. Alcohol isn't the solution, but by the use of constant prayer. Jehovah's Word of Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7 shows how we can gain complete peace of mind. That's quite a statement, isn't it? Gain complete peace of mind. Ephesians chapter 4. Verses 6 and 7. We've all read these verses many times before. You can probably quote them by heart, but this afternoon we want to pick them apart a little bit. Ephesians 4, beginning with verse 6. It's Philippians 4, 6, and 7, not Ephesians. Philippians 6, it says, "Do not be anxious over anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, along with thanksgiving, let your petitions be made known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your mental powers by means of Christ Jesus." Do not be anxious over anything. It's all encompassing. Nothing is left out. But in everything by prayer, we go to Jehovah prayer, we talk to him about the problem, and supplication. Supplication is from the deepest part of our heart. It's an earnest prayer coupled with intense feelings. That's real heavy. Along with thanksgiving, that's an interesting aspect. Did you ever think of that? When you go to Jehovah and you ask him, "Here's my problem, Jehovah, I need help with it," it says, along with thanksgiving. Do you tell him what you're thankful for? I'm grateful that I have my health. I'm grateful I have a job. I'm grateful my kids are doing good. I'm grateful for a faithful wife. All the good things. At the same time, we're asking for help. We thank Jehovah for what he's already given us, what we have. And then if we do that, it says, let your petitions be made known to God. That's what we're doing. And then it says, the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts. How is it with a problem? Surpasses all understanding. The previous, not the revised issue, says surpasses all thought. So how is it with the problem? We go to bed with it, we wake up with it, and we carry it all day long. It's in our head, our problem. And if we do that, he'll guard our hearts, he promises, and your mental powers by means of Christ Jesus. So it's this peace of God that provides or proves to be a safeguard against us getting discouraged. Somebody once asked Sister Putzinger, who was also in the concentration camp for 9 years, how she fought discouragement, remained positive, and it was encouraged during her years in the concentration camp. She said she didn't let herself think about the horrible conditions, the lack of food, the filth she endured, the harshness, the berating. She said every day in prison she looked for 5 positive things, and then she'd think about all those things. If the sun was shining, she would think about what a blessing the sunshine was. And if it was raining, she'd think about how Jehovah causes it to rain. It's a blessing to the earth because we know the earth needs rain. So can't we learn something from her experience? To think positive. Think about just how blessed we are. And we want to emphasize the positive thinking positively about our blessings. Now, talking about the thinking of positive, being positive, there's a story told of a village king in Papua New Guinea who had a close friend who he grew up with, and the king's friend had the habit of looking at every situation that ever occurred in his life, good or bad, no matter what it was. He always thought positive, and he remarked, "This is good." Always thought positive. Well, one day, the king and his friend were out on a hunting expedition. The friend would load the gun for the king. The friend had apparently done something wrong in preparing one of the guns, because when the king fired it, it blew his thumb off. Well, examining the situation, the friend remarked, as usual, "This is good," to which the king said, "It's not good." And so he sends his friend to jail. Well, about a year later, the same king is out hunting in an area he should have known better to stay clear of, and he was captured by cannibals. So they took him to their village. They tied his hands, stacked some wood, put a stake in the ground, tied him to the stake, and as they were coming near to light the fire, they noticed his thumb was missing. Well, because they were superstitious, they never ate anybody unless they were whole. So they untied the king and sent him on his way. Well, as he's going home, he's reminded of how he lost his thumb, and he was feeling sorry for how he treated his friend. So he goes right to the jail to speak to his friend. He says, "You were right. It was good. My thumb was blown off." And he tells him the whole story. And so he said, "I'm so very sorry for sending you to jail for so long. It was bad for me to do this." His friend said, "No, it was good." The king said, "How could it be good that I send my best friend to jail for a whole year?" And the friend answered, "If I hadn't been in jail, I'd have been with you." So by counting our blessings and keeping a positive attitude, it again stresses what we can do to help minimize our reasons to be anxious. Now, another way our own cares and anxieties can be minimized, or at least made easier to bear, is when we're looking after fatherless children and widows during their times of trouble. Well, how can we really look after that group? The original Greek word that's translated to look after is defined as having a care for, providing for. It conveys the idea of visiting someone to bring them the help that they need. We can offer words of encouragement. We can convey warmth with a smile. We can offer kind words. We can make ourselves available. And you know how some of the friends are. They're reluctant to accept, see. So you have to take the initiative. I'll be out. I can get your prescription. I can pick up your milk or your butter or bread, whatever you need. And we have to always remember the badge of identification for a real Christian isn't love, just love. It's self-sacrificing love. There's also peace of mind and satisfaction of heart when we train our whole family to walk in Jehovah's way. The alternative is to yield to the pressures of the world, pressures to divide our time with our family in an unhealthy proportion that usually favors ourself. So let me ask you, what is more stimulating, satisfying, and a rewarding work is there than raising our own families in love, giving them love, and teaching them how to love? Don't most of us as parents wish we could spend more time with our children for the purpose of knowing them better and for the greater opportunity of giving them the mind of Christ? There was a father in Paraguay taking advantage of his opportunity to work with in field service with his 9-year-old son. The local priest started to ridicule both the father and the son, but especially the son, saying, "What could a kid know or teach about the Bible?" So people started to gather. We could be sure there was at least one anxious person. But the father said to the priest, "Try him out, test him." So the priest asked, "Who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible?" Well, the young man hesitated for a minute, and then he said, "The son of Amram and Jochebed." Yes, he knew the names of Moses' father and mother. So there's no question but that father was spending time with his son. A young sister in school raised her hand after the teacher asked the class if anyone knew of a miracle. And she called on her, and the sister said, "When God parted the Red Sea to allow the Israelites to cross on dry ground." The teacher said, "Well, that wasn't a miracle because it was only a couple inches of water. Does anybody else have a miracle?" Same sister raised her hand. Teacher called on her and she said, "Well, if they drowned in a couple inches of water, wasn't that a miracle? The two experiences remind me of our young ones, remind me of a poem that was written by Walt Whitman, and it goes like this. I saw tomorrow marching by on little children's feet, within their forms and faces her prophecy complete. I saw tomorrow look at me through little children's eyes. I thought, how carefully we teach if we were truly wise. So the point being, there can be joy and comfort for us when we obey the principles in Jehovah's Word and teach our young ones. Luke 12:29, Jesus said, stop being in anxious suspense. In other words, we don't want to be overly concerned about physical and material needs, but to continue to focus on what's really important, the sanctification of Jehovah's name and the vindication of his sovereignty. I want to conclude with this last thought. If Jehovah brings you to it, he will bring you through it. In happy moments, praise Jehovah. In difficult moments, seek Jehovah. In quiet moments, worship Jehovah. In painful moments, trust Jehovah. In every moment, thank Jehovah.
Brother Shammas, on behalf of the South Livermore congregation, we want to thank you for that information, as well as for your wife, Mary Rose, coming out to deliver that. It's one of those times where we almost wish we still had the 1 hour talk on Sunday. But thank you so much. I'm sure we all had a measure of relief from our anxieties from that.